Have you ever heard of a confession that was never meant to be revealed? In the convent of Saint Helena, a nun broke the silence, and the price she paid was far too high. That night, inside the small confessional, she shared a secret that did not belong to this world. And soon after, she vanished without a trace. What she revealed was so disturbing that it still echoes through the convent's walls. A pact, a forbidden promise, and a voice that continues to whisper, begging for help from beyond. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will chill you to the very end. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a like to support our work. That way YouTube knows you love this kind of content and will keep delivering more real, terrifying cases just like this one. Now, turn off the lights, close the door, and join me as we uncover the forbidden confession of a nun who vanished without a trace. The convent of Saint Helena stood on a lonely hill, surrounded by ancient trees that seemed to whisper secrets to the wind. Its walls, worn down by centuries, carried the weight of prayers, penance, and stories never told. At night, when the bells had gone silent and the candles burned out one by one, a heavy stillness settled over the place. But it was not an ordinary silence. It was thick, as if something unseen was watching every step taken along the cold corridors. The nuns retired early, following a rigid routine that rarely changed. Yet, in recent months, some of them had begun to notice subtle disturbances. The faint shuffle of footsteps in the cloister when no one was supposed to be awake. The creak of the refectory doors, though they were locked. The murmur of voices in Latin echoing from the chapel in the dead of night. The convent, once a symbol of peace and retreat, now seemed wrapped in an atmosphere so dense it bordered on suffocating. The damp stone walls appeared to breathe alongside the sisters, carrying whispers that should never be heard. At the center of it all was the main church, tall, imposing, dimly lit by the weak light that filtered through stained glass windows. Many who entered confessed to feeling a sudden chill at the altar, as if an invisible presence were kneeling beside them in prayer. That particular night, the wind howled outside, but within the convent there was nothing but the quickened rhythm of one's own heartbeat. It was only the beginning of something that would never be forgotten. Among all the sisters in the convent, one stood out in unsettling ways: Sister Clara. Her steps were always discreet, her voice seldom rising above a whisper, and yet her presence seemed to linger in every corner she passed. Clara had arrived years earlier, transferred from another congregation, and from the beginning displayed an intense, almost obsessive, devotion. She spent hours before the altar, long after official prayers had ended, often the last to retreat for the night. Some nuns believed her faith was exemplary, but others felt an unease in her distant gaze, as if she carried a burden no penance could ever erase. Over time, signs grew even more disturbing. Clara would vanish during the night, returning pale and exhausted, as though returning from a battle no one else could see. At meals, her trembling hands betrayed her, and on certain days she avoided every glance, lowering her eyes as though hiding something. The older sisters, seasoned in the unspoken traditions of the convent, whispered quietly among themselves, "There are secrets the veil cannot conceal." And the greatest of those secrets was about to surface, dark enough to change the history of the convent forever. As the weeks passed, Sister Clara's presence became increasingly unsettling to the others. She no longer smiled, not even in the rare moments of quiet allowed among the sisters. During meals, her eyes remained fixed on her plate, as though her mind was somewhere far away. At night, many witnessed something far more disturbing: Clara walking the convent corridors alone, a rosary clutched in her hands, her lips moving in prayers no one could hear. Strangely, her steps never seemed to echo, as if the very floor itself absorbed her movements. Some of the younger nuns swore they had seen her standing motionless before the altar for hours, her eyes lost in the flicker of candlelight, as though entranced by something only she could see. Others whispered that, passing by the empty chapel, they had overheard Clara murmuring phrases in Latin, words that belonged to no known prayer. Tension began to spread through the convent. Whispers filled the hallways, quickly silenced by the weight of fear. No one dared confront her, yet all felt that something was terribly wrong. Then one night, Clara did something none of them expected. She sought out a trusted sister and begged for a confession. Not just any confession, but one that, she warned, could never be repeated aloud. It was the beginning of something that would change life in the convent forever. That midnight, when the convent slept in silence, Clara knocked softly on the door of Sister Teresa's cell. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, as though she had not rested in days. "I need to confess," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But this is no ordinary confession. It must never be spoken to anyone. not even to the priest. Teresa hesitated. Confession was a sacred sacrament, reserved for priests, never meant to be shared between nuns. Yet the desperation in Clara's eyes was so haunting that Teresa could not bring herself to refuse. Guided by an instinct she did not fully understand, she led Clara to the small confessional chamber beside the church. The space was cold, lit only by the faint glow of a single oil lamp. The worn wooden grille between them cast long, uneasy shadows across the walls. Clara clutched her rosary so tightly her knuckles were red. Before beginning, she issued a warning that sounded less like a plea and more like a command. "What I'm about to say cannot be repeated. If anyone finds out, he will come for us." The silence that followed was suffocating. Teresa felt a chill run down her spine. This was not just a confession. It was the prelude to something far darker, something neither of them was prepared to face. And then, slowly, Clara began to speak. Clara's breathing was heavy, as though each word she was about to utter carried a weight too great to bear. On the other side of the wooden grill, Sister Teresa waited in silence, her heart racing, already regretting she had agreed to listen. "These past nights," Clara began, her voice breaking, "I have not been praying alone." Teresa frowned, unsure of what she meant. "When I kneel before the altar, I feel someone beside me. At first I thought it was only my imagination, but then I heard it. Words whispered in Latin, but they were not prayers. They were commands, orders." Her eyes seemed distant, as if replaying the moment. "He calls me by name," Clara continued. "He knows things no one else could know. He promises relief from the pain I carry, but in return he asks for something I cannot give." Sweat rolled down her forehead as she gripped the rosary tighter, as if it were the only thing keeping her sane. "And it's not just the voice." Her whisper grew weaker. "I saw a shadow. Tall, hunched, kneeling before the cross as though mocking our prayers. When I tried to look directly, the candles went out." On the other side, Teresa clutched her habit to steady her trembling hands. Every instinct told her to interrupt, to end this madness, but fear bound her in silence. Clara leaned closer to the grill, her words barely audible. "He said he would return. And when he does, it will be for me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Teresa dared not reply. She knew in that moment that neither of them would ever find peace again. The air inside the confessional seemed to grow heavier with every word. Sister Teresa felt cold sweat trickle down her neck, but she didn't dare interrupt. Clara's eyes were wide, haunted, as if speaking aloud would make the nightmare even more real. "I tried to resist," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "I spent entire nights praying, begging that it was only a test. But it wasn't. He was there, always at my left side, kneeling as I prayed. When I closed my eyes, I could feel his breath on my skin." Her fingers shook as they ran over the beads of the rosary, clutching it as though it were her last defense. "One night, when the wind blew out every candle in the church, I heard him clearly, 'You already belong to me.'" Clara's tears spilled freely now. "I told him no, that my life belonged to God. But he laughed inside the church, a laugh no human could make." Teresa pressed her fists tight against her habit, trying to fight the dread consuming her. And then, Clara's words faltered. "He made a promise. He said he didn't need my acceptance. That simply hearing his voice had opened the door. And now, no matter where I go, he will always find me." For a moment, the oil lamp flickered violently, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. Teresa almost cried out, but Clara seemed oblivious, lost in the weight of her confession. "This is not just temptation, sister," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "It is a pact, and I don't know how to escape." The silence that followed screamed louder than any sound. Teresa realized she had just heard something that should never have been spoken aloud. Clara's whisper still echoed in Teresa's mind. A pact, made inside the very house of God? The thought was unbearable, yet the terror in Clara's eyes left no room for doubt. "He didn't ask for permission," Clara murmured, her voice breaking. "He simply declared it as though I had already agreed. He said my prayers, my fasting, even my silence, all of it now belonged to him." Her breathing quickened as if fighting against the memory itself. "And it's not just me," she added, leaning closer to the wooden grill. "He forced me to make a promise, to keep silent, to never reveal him. And if I break that promise, he will not come only for me, but for all of you." Teresa shut her eyes tightly. Her heart pounded and the room felt smaller, suffocating. Now she understood why Clara had begged her to guard the secret. This was no ordinary burden. Clara's gaze grew distant, fixed on something beyond the cold walls. "He marked me," she said at last. Slowly, she pulled back her sleeve, revealing a dark bruise on her arm. "I woke with this, not knowing how it happened." He said it was only the beginning, a sign of what's to come. The confessional fell into dreadful silence. Then a sudden creak came from the rafters above, snapping both of them from their trance. Teresa's whole body trembled. She knew from that moment on she was no longer just a witness to a confession. She was now part of something far darker, something that stretched beyond faith into the unknown. Sister Teresa sat frozen, struggling to process every word she had just heard. Clara's confession was no mere spiritual struggle. It was a curse, heavy and binding. The idea of keeping such a secret felt unbearable, yet the terror in Clara's eyes made it clear. Silence was the only option. "You cannot tell anyone," Clara whispered, her gaze distant, almost trance-like. "Not him, not anyone." He said he would know. Teresa's throat tightened. The weight of that warning pressed down on her chest until breathing itself became difficult. Her instinct urged her to run to the priest to beg for help. But something deeper, the fear of dooming them all, held her captive. She tried to answer, to offer some kind of comfort, but no words came. Instead, she traced the sign of the cross over herself, clinging to the only shield she had left. When Teresa finally left the confessional that night, her steps down the corridor felt heavier than ever before. Each closed door, each extinguished candle, seemed to hide unseen eyes that followed her. The convent, once a sanctuary of peace, had become a prison of silence, where speaking a single word could bring destruction. From that moment forward, both women carried a vow, not of faith but of fear. A silence imposed not by God, but by the darkness that lingered within the church. And in her heart, Teresa knew, silence would not protect them forever. That very week, strange events began to spread through the convent, small at first, but charged with a weight that unsettled even the most devout sisters. The first to notice were those who tended the chapel. Each morning they found candles still burning at the altar, candles they swore had been snuffed out the night before. Stranger still, many had melted halfway down as though they had been burning for hours. Then came the noises, doors slamming shut with no wind, footsteps rushing down the cloister while every nun was locked in her cell. And one night, a sister swore she heard chanting in Latin echoing from the choir loft. When she carried her lamp to investigate, the loft was empty. The crucifixes were next. One by one they began to fall from the walls. The most terrifying moment came when a heavy wooden crucifix crashed to the stone floor just as Clara entered the refectory. The sound echoed so loudly it froze everyone in place. Clara, however, showed no reaction. She simply stood still, eyes fixed on the ground as though she had expected it. The sisters whispered in fear, but the vow of silence weighed on them like chains. No one dared speak openly. Only Clara and Teresa knew the truth. These were not coincidences. They were signs. And they meant that something far greater, and far darker, was drawing near. The next night, when the convent had settled into its usual silence, something happened that shattered what little calm remained. During evening prayers, Sister Beatrice, one of the youngest nuns, suddenly stopped singing and let out a stifled cry. The others turned toward her, alarmed, but Beatrice could only point, her hand trembling violently, toward the statue of Saint Michael the Archangel beside the altar. Its eyes, usually carved in serene devotion, lifted heavenward, now seemed fixed in a different direction, staring straight at Clara. Some sisters recoiled, convincing themselves it was only an illusion, a trick of candlelight flickering against stone. But Beatrice swore she had seen the change happen before her very eyes. Clara, however, did not flinch. She stood perfectly still, staring back at the statue for several long seconds, then bowed her head in silence as though she recognized the sign. That night, few managed to sleep. Some spent hours in desperate prayer, others sobbed quietly in their cells. The sense was unmistakable. The convent was being watched. Not only by God, but by something else, something that defied their faith. And deep down they all knew, if even the statues turned against them, this was no longer imagination. The stories of strange happenings spread quietly through the convent like a poisoned whisper. Fear grew thicker with each passing night, and it became impossible to pretend everything was normal. Some sisters wept during prayer, others trembled simply by stepping into the chapel. Finally, the decision was made to call the priest responsible for the congregation, a man of stern demeanor, known for his intolerance toward superstition. He listened to the accounts with a grave face, but never once did his expression betray belief. He walked the church, examined the statues, lit and extinguished candles, then crossed his arms and shook his head. Mass hysteria, he declared firmly. Silence and isolation can play tricks on the mind. You must pray harder and feed your faith, not these fantasies. The sisters exchanged uneasy glances, but his word was law within the convent. His voice grew harsher. I do not wish to hear of these rumors again. Faith has no place for inventions. Anyone who spreads fear among the sisters will be sinning against obedience. The order was clear. No more discussion. No more whispers. Everything was to be dismissed as illusion. Yet deep down all of them knew it was not in their minds. And Clara? Clara said nothing at all, her gaze distant, as though she had already accepted that silence would offer no protection. That night, the convent felt suffocating in its silence. The priest's command echoed in every corner, but for Clara, the weight of it was unbearable. When the clock struck midnight, she once again knocked softly on Sister Teresa's door. I need to speak again, she whispered, her eyes swollen and red from sleepless nights. Teresa hesitated but allowed her in. Once more, the small confessional became the stage for a forbidden secret. The oil lamp flickered weakly, casting twisted shadows that seemed unwilling to hear what was about to be spoken. Clara knelt, gripping the wooden grill with trembling hands. Her voice was low, but dripping with desperation. He came back. Teresa's chest tightened. What happened? She asked, barely above a whisper. Clara's tears ran freely now. He spoke to me again. Not just whispers this time, full sentences. He said I cannot run, that there is no longer a choice. She closed her eyes as sobs threatened to break her voice. Then slowly she forced the words out. He said, he will come for me. The silence that followed felt suffocating. The flame of the lamp wavered violently as though a sudden draft had crossed the room, though no door was open. Teresa pressed her hands together, trying to cling to the fragments of faith left in her, but she knew nothing would ever be the same. Finally, Clara's voice fell to a broken whisper, one that chilled Teresa to her core. Do not pray for me. Pray for the others. The morning after Clara's second confession, the convent was weighed down by an eerie quiet, heavier than ever before. The sisters began their routine as usual, but soon realized something was terribly wrong. Clara's cell was empty. Her bed was untouched, the sheets smooth as if no one had slept there. Her habit still hung neatly on its hook, and on the small table lay her rosary, carefully coiled, abandoned. Panic spread quickly. The nuns searched every hallway, every chamber, calling her name in hushed, fearful tones. But no answer came. Then one of them noticed. The heavy wooden doors of the main church were slightly ajar. That alone was enough to chill them. The doors were always locked at night. When they pushed them open, a gust of cold wind rushed inside. The altar was still lit by candles no one remembered lighting. And there, on the stone floor leading toward the steps of the sanctuary, were long, dark streaks, as though something or someone had been dragged. But the most terrifying sign waited at the base of the altar. 3 deep scratches carved into the stone itself, long and parallel, like the mark of claws. Clara was gone. And deep inside they all knew she had not left of her own free will. The sisters approached the altar with hesitant steps, the sound of their habits brushing against the stone echoing far too loudly in the silence. It felt as though the entire convent was holding its breath, aware that something dreadful had taken place. On the cold stone floor, the drag marks were unmistakable. Long, continuous streaks as if someone had been pulled across the church by force. But it was the details that made their blood run cold. Alongside the streaks were smaller scratches, uneven and frantic, as if fingernails had clawed desperately at the ground, fighting to resist. And among the dust and candle wax, a faint dark trail smeared the stones. None dared say it aloud, but they all knew it was blood. At the base of the altar, the 3 claw-like gashes carved into the stone were even more terrifying up close. They were too deep, too sharp to have been made by any human hand. Several sisters collapsed to their knees, clutching their rosaries, praying through tears. Others clung to one another in silence, their fear beyond words. Sister Teresa stood frozen, her heart pounding. She knew without question what this meant. Clara's warnings had not been madness. They had been prophecy. Then, as if to confirm the horror, a sudden draft swept through the church, snuffing out nearly every candle at once. Darkness swallowed the room. And in that darkness, some swore they heard a voice, faint, cold, drawn out. She is already mine. In the days following Clara's disappearance, the convent was drowned in a suffocating silence. None of the sisters dared to speak of what they had seen before the altar. When the priest was informed, he dismissed it quickly, telling them only to pray for the sister who had been urgently transferred to another congregation. But everyone knew that was a lie. It was Sister Teresa who uncovered the truth. While tidying Clara's small cell, she noticed a loose board beneath the prayer table. Kneeling down, she carefully pried it open, and found a worn leather journal hidden inside. Her heart raced as she sat on the narrow bed and opened it. Page after page was filled with Clara's handwriting, firm at first, but increasingly shaky the further she read. The entries revealed nights of torment. Clara described voices calling her inside the church, shadows kneeling beside her during prayers, a presence that grew stronger with each passing day. On some pages, crude sketches of strange symbols appeared, symbols she claimed were etched into the stones of the altar. But what terrified Teresa most was that the journal was not only Clara's words. Here and there, between her sentences, were short phrases scrawled in a different, jagged hand. Latin words, sharp and menacing, as if someone, or something, had answered her prayers directly on the page. Shaking, Teresa slammed the book shut. There was no longer any doubt. Clara had not been fighting her imagination. She had been chosen, marked, and perhaps condemned from the very beginning. Sister Teresa's hands trembled as she turned to the final pages of the journal. Clara's handwriting, once steady and neat, had become jagged and frantic, the ink blotched as though written in fear. The entries spoke of endless nights without sleep, of the presence growing closer, of a constant whispering of her name. One page read, "He is not only in the church anymore. Now he follows me through the corridors. I feel his gaze when I am alone. There is no safe place." Further along, frantic phrases scattered the pages like cries for help. "He laughs at my prayers. The candles die when he comes. He said I no longer belong to God." Then, on the very last page, written in trembling, uneven strokes, was a single paragraph. "Tonight he will come. If I do not return, pray for me." The sentence ended abruptly, the pen trailing off. The rest of the page was blank, except for a dark stain in the corner, one that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Teresa shut the journal with a gasp, tears streaming down her face. There was no longer any doubt. Clara had not vanished by chance. She had been taken. And worse still, the journal made one thing terribly clear. This was only the beginning. The following day, the sisters were summoned to the chapel. The priest entered with a stern expression, the Mother Superior at his side. His voice carried through the cold stone walls, sharp and commanding. "Sister Clara has been transferred to another congregation by order of the church. That is all you need to know." The nuns exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared to speak. They knew well enough. There had been no packing of belongings, no formal letters, no farewell. Clara had not been transferred. She had vanished. Sensing their doubt, the priest's tone hardened. "Faith thrives in silence and obedience. Any word spoken against what I have told you here will be treated as sin against our order." The message was clear. The truth would remain buried. Outwardly, life in the convent resumed. The bells rang, the prayers echoed, the chants filled the halls. But beneath that mask of routine, fear festered. Sisters avoided the altar, their steps quickened when passing the confessional, and every whisper carried the same thought. Clara was still there, in some form, watching. Sister Teresa held the journal in secret, hidden away. She could not bring herself to give it to the priest. Deep down, she knew it was more than evidence. It was a warning. If revealed, another might share Clara's fate. The convent carried on, cloaked in silence. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of fear. Months passed since Clara's disappearance. Outwardly, the convent had fallen back into its rigid rhythm of prayers and chants. The silence imposed by the priest still held firm. But in the dead of night, the walls began to whisper again. It started with Sister Beatrice, the same young nun who once swore the statue's gaze had shifted. One midnight, during silent prayer, her face went pale. Her rosary slipped from her trembling hands as she stared at the confessional. "I heard her," she whispered, voice cracking. "I heard Clara's voice." The others turned toward the booth, dread spreading like fire. Beatrice swore the voice had called her name, faint but unmistakable, drifting through the wooden grill. "Teresa, help me." The following night, another nun claimed the same. A woman's voice, weak and broken, echoed from the confessional. Some even insisted they heard soft knocks against the wood, as if someone were trapped inside, pleading to be freed. Teresa could no longer bring herself to enter the chapel after dark. She knew in her heart it was Clara. But she also knew this was no ordinary haunting. Clara was not simply asking for deliverance, she was warning them. And with each passing night, the voice grew clearer, more desperate, more insistent, as if something was drawing closer, bringing with it a terror none of them were ready to face. Time moved on, but the silence never managed to erase what had happened. Though the priest's warning still lingered, the story of Clara spread in whispers along the convent's dark corridors, passed from one trembling voice to another. At meals, some sisters avoided even glancing at the altar. Others quickened their steps when passing the confessional, fearful of hearing the faint cry of a voice that should no longer exist. The older nuns died, younger ones joined, yet the story survived, carried like a shadow from one generation to the next. It became an unspoken rule, a whispered warning. Never enter the church alone after midnight. Clara's fate turned into something between a cautionary tale and a curse. Some spoke of her as a victim, her faith consumed by something unspeakable. Others believed she had been chosen, condemned from the very beginning. But all agreed on one thing: there was something different about that church. The air was heavy, the stained glass windows seemed to twist shadows unnaturally, and the altar, no matter how carefully cleaned, always felt occupied, as though someone invisible still knelt there in silence. Sister Teresa, frail and aged, never revealed the existence of Clara's journal. She carried it with her to the end, convinced that sharing it would only invite the same doom upon another. And so, the story lived on. Not in sermons or official records, but in hushed tones, in glances filled with fear, in prayers whispered faster than usual. Clara was not forgotten. But neither was she ever truly spoken of aloud. It became a memory that turned into a warning, and into a curse. To this day, those who visit the convent of Saint Helena feel the weight of silence that clings to its walls. Time has passed, generations of nuns have come and gone, yet the legend endures like a shadow that refuses to fade. Visitors sometimes report hearing hurried footsteps in the corridors, though no one is there. Others describe a sudden chill when kneeling at the altar, as if someone unseen were praying beside them. But the most unsettling accounts are always about the confessional. In the dead of night, its wooden frame creaks as though shifting under an invisible weight. And those who dare to approach swear they hear a faint, trembling voice from within. "Help me. I'm still here." No one dares to open the door. The fear is not of finding Clara, but of discovering what remained in her place. And so, each night, the convent seems to breathe the same echo, a distant cry, a plea for help that will never be answered. An eternal whisper that survives through generations, reminding all who enter that some pacts cannot be broken, not even by death. Because Clara never truly left. She is still waiting.